Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to our Insider Insight Show. I'm honored to have back with me someone who's a very dear friend and someone who is an incredible patriot who's on the front line of fighting for every American's freedom and liberty, especially with this latest goat rodeo as it relates to an election. I'm honored to have back with me my friend Senator Pat Colbeck. A little background on Pat. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan. He survived at the University of Michigan. It's hard to believe as a conservative.
I was on North Campus.
Okay, there you go. He was isolated. They had him locked in on North Campus. In addition, Pat has 24 years of management, consulting, and engineering experience. Pat served his time with NASA as it relates to, it was Space Lab, wasn't it, Pat?
I actually worked for Boeing on contract on Space Station.
Space Station, there you are. Pat served in his 2 terms as our senator in the state of Michigan. Outstanding, and ran for governor. And frankly, I think some of the shenanigans we saw in place this last Tuesday were all Pat, I'm going to say it. I think they were put in place against you as well. In fact, our state would not be the current largest prison of war camp in all of Michigan and all of the United States here in the state of Michigan because of our Governor Gretchen Whitmer if Pat had actually won that election. It's my honor to have back with me Senator Pat Colbeck. By the way, folks, his website's phenomenal. Let'sfixstuff.org. Let'sfixstuff.org. Pat, welcome back to the Insider Insight Show.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Dave, and thanks for all the effort that you put into this. You made some critical discoveries along the way that have helped me stay focused on the key aspects of the election process, and it's been a real team effort, and I really appreciate all your efforts.
And it's likewise. I appreciate everything you've done and how you're doing it. Okay, Pat, let's start with Election Day.
Yeah.
We all had some indications before Election Day that there were going to be some problems. I interviewed General Tom McInerney the Sunday before Election Day, that we ended up flipping from our channel and our radio show up onto YouTube. It was eventually taken down on Election Day, 7:11 in the morning. And in that, General McInerney spoke about the fact that there is a potential electronic cyber warfare with stealing of votes through platforms such as Hammer and Scorecard. You were wise to that. You and I spoke the Monday before the election. Let's go to Election Day now. And you were on the ground and educate our listeners and viewers of what you found and what you saw and what you experienced.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was able to watch that YouTube video with General McInerney interview before it got taken down, and it had the occasion of putting in RAM what I should be looking for on the floor of the Detroit AV Counting Board. And so when I got into the Detroit AV Counting Board, which is out at the TCF Center out in Detroit, it's a very large facility. You get in there, they take your temperature as you go in. You're wearing a mask nonstop. It's a wonderful experience. And you get in, you register. I was a registered poll challenger with the Election Integrity Fund. If people want to find out more about that, go to the electionintegrityfund.org. That's an organization I helped form a while back. I'm not officially a member of it, but I helped get them launched. And really good group of folks, and they provided over 500 volunteers or so across the state of Michigan to go off and help ensure this, the integrity of the election as an independent organization. So I get in there, I'm checked in, and I'm looking around at the all the lay of the land. They've got 134 AV counting boards in the city of Detroit, and what that is a way of dividing up 503 precincts in the city of Detroit in a way that allows them to bundle those precincts into little tables that makes it a little bit more manageable for the counting. So instead of making sure all your books and ballots and everything balance at the precinct level, they actually create this new entity called a counting board that creates a set of precincts that they go off and balance. And oh, by the way, I should point out, this is just the absentee ballots that are counted here. They have a whole separate operation at a different facility called Ford Field where they tracked all the poll ballots. Now, why is that important? Because I'll just show you how this all tees up here and why it was an interesting 24-hour plus shift that I served out there. Is that I kept getting anecdotal calls saying there are people that have said that they already voted absentee, but now they're able to go off and vote at the polls as well. Well, some people got to vote twice, and that's because they printed out poll books for the absentee ballots on Sunday, if you will, and if the fact that somebody voted absentee did not get captured in that poll book before the data dump, You would have an absentee ballot that's tracked at the Detroit AV Counting Board, and you would have the individual poll books, which are live feeds on the poll status out at the in-person voting. So that same person, if they voted late enough or it didn't get updated in the database, they could actually vote twice. And so I'm sitting there going, this, first of all, first appearances are saying this setup doesn't make sense. It's nothing like anything that I see in any of the other areas. And, I've been around the polls quite a bit as an elected official. So I've had an opportunity to go off and observe what happens in the election. I used to serve as vice chair of the Michigan Senate Elections and Government Reform Committee. And I sat with Catherine Engelbrecht, and we've gone through and diagrammed out all the key election processes, everything from registering to vote to voting in person, to voting absentee, to closing out a precinct and reporting the results, to doing a recount. We've gone through all those processes. I'm pretty comfortable on how it all maps out. Detroit was very, very unique. And
that's one way to put it. Another way is criminal setup, right?
Well, there was a lot of, obfuscation is kind of the key word.
Right.
And if you want to hold a free and fair election, give people confidence in the execution of the election, you go out of your way to turn all of your poker cards face up. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be hiding them. You want to convince everybody that you're on the up and up.
Right.
I did not experience that, and it was my first question of the night. I came up to Chris Thomas, who was a senior consultant to Janice Winfrey, who's a clerk of the city of Detroit. And I've worked with Chris when I was in the Michigan Senate. So when I told you I diagrammed out all those processes, well, I sat down with him to make sure I got them right? So to check my work, and he's been a state election official for almost 3 decades. So I walked up to Chris. I go, he's the one who's going to have the answer to this question. I go, Chris, how are the votes from the tabulation machines transferred outside of this facility to county and other parties? And he says, I don't know. I go, well, really?
Yeah, one would think with 30 years experience he would, Pat.
And it's kind of the most critical part of the whole election, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, individual ballots are important. Don't get me wrong. I mean, individual votes are important. But you know what's more important?
Yeah.
The tally of those votes.
That's
Stalin knew that, right?
Right.
He goes, it's not who votes that counts. It's the one who counts the vote that counts. And that's why I wanted to zero in on this, because this is the first indicator throughout the night that there was going to be serious issues with something that's very important to integrity of elections called chain of custody.
That's key.
And this chain of custody is not just a paper trail.
Nope.
There's actually an electronic trail to this as well. Mm-hmm. And which is why the next set of questions that I asked were even more concerning. And as poll challengers, I can see the stuff that's physical. I can see a ballot. I can see a ballot envelope. I can see a signature popped up on a screen as a poll challenger. What I can't see are a bunch of electrons moving around in an Ethernet cable, and that's what I saw inside the Detroit AV Counting Board.
So why was that Ethernet cable important? Because this is critical to this whole process, because everybody wants to cover up the internet situation, the electronic highway. Educate our listeners, Pat.
Well, first, let's go over the configuration, and I'll show why it's such a concern. Because, all right, all around here, there's 134 stations that have electronic poll books. All right, these are where they actually. This is essentially an extract of the qualified voter file. If you're not in that poll book, you're not supposed to be able to vote.
Right.
And that's another whole set of games that were played that whole night long here that we'll get into a little bit later probably. So we knew there was a bunch of laptops set up there. Mm-hmm. And up on the wall, there's a whole bunch of Wi-Fi routers, so wireless routers all over the place. And I did a little Wi-Fi network scan with my phone. And lo and behold, there was a whole bunch of different hotspots that were out there. And one of them was called AV_counter. For me, that tells me that those computers, particularly the electronic poll books, were potentially connected via Wi-Fi. And if they're connected to the Wi-Fi, what else could be connected to the Wi-Fi? That Wi-Fi extended outside the AV Counting Board, and anybody sitting outside with a laptop could plug into that and hack into that. And they have whole conferences designed to go off and do this. Now, I did not see any physical Ethernet cables coming in there, so I'm presuming that the poll books were connected via Wi-Fi. Where I did see Ethernet cables, however, were at the tabulation machines. All the tabulation machines, tabulation computers, were networked together to a router. That router was connected to a series of adjudicators. The adjudicators were connected with another router to another router that was connected to what appeared to be the main internet connection for the facility. There's a little white cable coming out from the wall, and that connected into the election official computer. So for anybody who understands IT networking, and I'm a Microsoft certified small business specialist, it was a long time ago that I did that, but there's no expiration date to the best of my knowledge, and I know enough around cabling design, because that's what I used to do for the International Space Station. I know what the cables look like. I know what a Cat5, Cat6 cable looks like. And what we had was a series of routed Ethernet cables that were all connected to one another on the same network. And if one computer is connected to the internet, all the computers are connected to the internet. And as further corroboration of that effect, I went around to all the computers. And right now you're probably holding this podcast via this video conference on a Windows computer. And if you're looking at a Windows computer, you can go down in the bottom right-hand corner, and you'll see a little LAN connectivity icon. That indicates almost always that it's an internet connection. If you unplug your router from the internet, it will see a little globe with a crosshatch X out there that says you're not connected to the internet. So I went up to the head election official. His name was Daniel Baxter, and I said, Mr. Baxter, are these computers connected to the internet?
And what was his response?
He said no.
No. Okay, good. Okay, perfect. Okay, that's the right answer, right?
From a security perspective, yes.
Right, because if it's connected to the internet, somebody can easily hack in and people can do bad things.
Right. And
okay.
From a truth perspective, it was the wrong answer.
Yeah, so he said no. Okay, right. What'd you find out?
So then I went and asked the deputy official later in the evening, as a former state representative by the name of David Nathan. I served with him in my first term. He was a state representative. I was a state senator. And I go, David, are these things connected to the internet? And he goes, no. I go, really? Can you help me out and verify that? And he goes, no, you're just going to have to trust me. And I go, listen, you may have been told a lie if you were told that they're not connected to the internet. All you got to do is, roll this little mouse cursor over that little icon, and it'll say in text, connected to the internet or not connected. And he refused to do that. And he says, nope, you're going to have to trust me. And by the way, I put this all into an affidavit as part of a lawsuit filed with the Great Lakes Justice Center that stipulates quite a few infractions that were made during the whole thing, during the whole evening here. And I want to clarify, I mean, just being connected to the internet, to the best of my knowledge, is not against the law. It's just really, really bad security practice on elections. And it violates that key term that we were talking about at the beginning, which is chain of custody. Like I said, I can follow all the physical ballots, but if all these computers are connected to one another, it's very difficult for me to squeeze into that Ethernet cable and follow every packet that's moved from one computer to the other. And so that opens the door to a lot of data manipulation and gets to the point of saying, how do I control the number that's presented from an individual tabulator that came from an individual counting board / precinct, if you will? How do I know that the handoff from one to the other is consistent? And then how do I know that the number that came out of that tabulator is the same number that gets reported out from the election officials? All right, so that's the concern. It's this handoff. And if I don't see that proof of that electronic handoff, I've got concern as a poll challenger. And here's the way it happens in a lot of other districts. They only connect a tabulator with a adjudicator machine. That's where you go off and say, hey, it didn't quite read this right. It flagged it. It couldn't figure out if this was a Biden vote or a Trump vote. And then you get a Republican and a Democrat, which is another issue. They didn't have Republicans doing this, but they were going off and doing this adjudication without us. That's one of the bases of the lawsuit. But when you're going off and doing that, you're supposed to have that look-see. Well, it was a dedicated connection between the scanner and the adjudicator. And if you wanted to transfer from there to anybody else, it had to be exported on an encrypted flash drive. That encrypted flash drive is protected and sealed in an envelope and then shipped up the chain to the clerk's office and to the county and to the state and all roads out between. So that's the way it's typically done. In Detroit, there was never one of those snapshots in time that says, hey, here's our vote tally so far. And so I can go back and check everything against that snapshot in time for that vote tally. We have people that were there all the way through the end of when they closed things up in that counting board that tell me that they never, ever put out the print tapes for those precincts up on the red board, which is where you display your – it's like when a teacher goes off and puts up the final grades at the end of the semester.
Right.
That's what happens and gets put up there. Nobody ever did that. And so where the heck are these results? Who heard about them? And so all of us who may have been watching on TV, and that wasn't me because I was on the ground the whole time, are wondering sometimes, where do all these numbers come from? And that's a key question for everybody to start asking. Because these numbers, the only time, you notice whenever they print out or report out on your vote tallies up on the screen when you're hitting refresh on your browser all night to find out what's going on with the election, it'll say the percent precincts reporting. Mm-hmm. Well, the way that's supposed to work is that those precincts only report when they finish their homework and they balance out the precinct, put the flash drive in a sealed envelope, and share that with friends and family upstream. Because then that's a snapshot in time under configuration control. Everybody knows that the vote tally equals the vote count equals everything that's said in that
precinct,
in that poll book. Yeah, mm-hmm. That's not what happened in Detroit, and so. That's my biggest concern is around this chain of custody. How these votes? Because in the middle of the night, we saw votes switching, and it was happening at times where nobody was actually doing any counting. So how were these changes actually happening? There was actually about a 4-hour period where there was absolutely bump kiss going on, nothing. And oh, by the way, they had about 12 boxes of military ballots sitting up on the center stage that they could have been counting during that time. But they chose not to count those ballots until after Republican poll challengers were locked out of the place in the morning. And why is that important? Well, here we are, and we're recording this on Veterans Day, it's going to air for a lot longer than that. But I want people to understand military ballots are very special.
Yep.
Not just because it's from the people that serve us in uniform, but because they come in a non-standard format that can't be read by those tabulation scanners. Mm-hmm. And so somebody's got to physically transfer the vote from a military ballot to a duplicate ballot that is compatible with the scanner. When that happens, you're supposed to have a Republican and a Democrat present. Out of 134 precincts or counting boards that were out there, I only counted 3 Republican poll workers. Now, we had more than that regarding poll challengers. Overnight, we had maybe about 30 on the floor. In the morning, we had a wave after wave of Republican poll challengers come in because we put out the call saying, guys, there's something rotten in Denmark. We need your help on this. And they came out, and I want to give a shout out to all the volunteers who sacrificed so much time and to come out here and document everything that they saw, because that now provides a standing in these court actions that are happening. If they wouldn't have done that, we never would have had a chance to get this thing moving through the court. And I think we're going to get it moving through the court. So a lot of stuff was happening, and these counted these military ballots, and they at a time when they blocked us out from actually getting into that poll chain. And many of you have seen the pictures. They actually put up cardboard to block us from actually looking at the process too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you, if you want to go off and diagram the exact opposite of how to ensure confidence in a free and fair election, the Detroit election officials did a pretty good job of it.
So now we're on election day. We're the day after election day. Pat, you're aware. You mentioned in the past that there were some huge delivery. A truck brought 38,000 ballots in after they supposedly sent everybody home.
Yeah, it brought 61. Mail bins, if you will, open mail bins, non-secured, by the way. It was just nice. Put in the truck, throw in the back. Yeah. So you want to talk chain of custody? Let's talk chain of custody on where the heck those ballots came from.
Right.
And I've talked to some people that write for newspapers. They swear that the Detroit city clerk certifies that they came from the Detroit Elections Bureau. Okay, well, let's just assume that that's the case. There still was a dump of 61 mail bins at a time when the polls were closed at 8 o'clock. Where how did these bins get to the city clerk's office in Detroit Elections Bureau? I'm kind of curious.
And then there was a big dump in the middle of the night, at least one, and I think some folks have actually, as recently as today, put up a couple electronic jumps of like 137, 138,000 votes. Where's that coming from?
By the way, you notice how everybody jumped on that when it came out, and they said it was just a clerical error, and they changed it. And then I think it was like within an hour later, they had another. So they did an adjustment, if you will, and they subtracted out like 100,000 of those votes, or 130,000 or something like that, from Biden and gave them back to Trump, like where it was before the jump. But then, like within an hour or so, they did another adjustment where they gave a whole boatload, like 95% of the votes over to Joe Biden again afterwards.
And they never addressed that. I mean,
no, they never did.
No.
Yeah, so it was a numbers game since day one. And here's the strange thing that happened. They right around midnight, everything stopped. And I've talking to people now that have been out of this little sequestered area out in the counting board. I've been able to see what's going on in other states, and apparently they stopped counting pretty much at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so, call me suspicious, but what's the purpose of everybody stopping their count pretty much at the same time? Could it be that they're all getting together and figuring out what their target number of votes are, mm-hmm. that they have to go off and get into the system to make sure that things are? It's just a theory, and but we're pulling all the data that go off and validate that. We've got plenty of enough examples of voter fraud. And by the way, anytime you interfere with the duties of a poll challenger, you are violating state statute. Mm-hmm. And so, do people want to say that that's election fraud? I believe it is. I mean, mm-hmm. It's a violation of statute. It's a violation of the integrity of the election, because I'm sitting there. We've got incident after incident of poll challengers deliberately being interfered with from being able to do their duties, and for me, that's ample example of fraud. And in our lawsuit that we've got, there's tons of examples of voter fraud. As a matter of fact, I think you saw Kayleigh McInerney put out a stack of all the affidavits that are out there. By the time this is all said and done, I think our stack of affidavits around election fraud are probably going to rival the thickness of the IRS tax code.
So, Pat, summarize for our listeners, where do you believe, because this was a multifactorial, multi-centric, I believe, stealing of an election and of votes. So many people are saying, it was that dead people voted in that. Well, there were. But then there are people say, well, there were votes added through extra ballots that were just filled out with one, just a vote for the president and no other votes. Yeah, there were. But Pat, and then we have this, it's a software glitch just at the machine. Pat, it goes beyond that. Okay, so first of all, what were the entry points for stealing, do you believe? Just summarize all the different points.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about my concern is that they're going to say this is a software glitch just on some Dominion-based voting machines with their Dominion software, when in fact all the software from all the voting machines have been compromised. But there was a steal there, but the big steal was at the information highway, the internet, through the use of hammer and scorecard. So first, dissect the different areas where the vote you believe was stolen.
Well, you framed it well. I think there's what I call kind of penny ante crimes, if you will,
right,
which are all important. I mean, elections have been won and lost by one vote before. I mean, this is not. I don't want to dismiss them as not being important, because we need to follow up on every one of them. That's why we have lawsuits to go off and rectify the situation. But I agree with you. The bigger concern is how do you do a mass manipulation of the data? Because right now in Michigan, we're at, they're showing officially or unofficially 146,123 vote deficit for President Trump against Joe Biden in the election. And so if we're just talking about maybe 1,000 or 2,000 ballot envelopes being backdated from November 4th to November 2nd, well, it's serious and we need to address it, but it's not going to change the outcome of the election. If, however, you have evidence associated with flipping specific votes, and to the tune of 140, 150,000 votes. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about 16 electoral college votes going to the red team, not the blue team. And that's why this is very important. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of examples of the kind of what I call the penny ante stuff on the ballot switches. I mean, here's one instance, just one example. You know, we have electronic poll books I talked about before. Well, in the middle of the night, they started supplementing the electronic poll book with a paper poll book. So now, instead of just the electronic poll book, you had a paper printout. Now, that's not necessarily bad on the face of it, right? Because Michigan, in the wisdom of voters who voted for, of which I was not one, Proposal 3 passed in 2018, which allowed for same-day voter registration. And so the story that came out of the clerk's office was that these were all same-day voter registrations. And I think it amounted, the number I heard was about 18,000 new voters on Election Day that decided to register to vote. All right, that's fine. That's the folks that were in this paper ballot. Later on, though, we had a whole bunch of ballots that corresponded to people that were not in the electronic poll book or not in the paper poll book, and they were put into what's called a problem bin. That problem bin apparently went back to the clerk's office. She said, nah, no problem with these. Just go off and manually enter in those people and add them to the electronic poll book, and they'll be part of the record now. Oh, that is against the law. That is blatantly saying that somebody who's not registered to vote all of a sudden can vote, and that's no good. And there's so many things upstream we could get into around what happened with the fact that Rock the Vote was provided access to go off and enter in qualified voters in the first place. So who's supervising that? What's the oversight? How do you check against that? Rock the Vote's going for Democrat voters. So if you want to get away from the penny ante stuff, and there's plenty of it, we could go on forever. It's almost, I was telling you before, I think this is kind of like a magic act.
Yeah.
Everybody wants you to focus in on all the penny ante stuff. That's kind of what the left hand is going off and doing with all the poof, flare, and all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, your right hand's going off and doing the real big change. And that's where I think the IT was doing, because it was behind cover. Nobody could see what was going on with those little electrons going up and down that Ethernet cable. And we know results were getting reported out. We just have no idea what the chain of custody was around those tallies that were being reported out. And why is that important? Because right now we got Vice President Biden claiming to be the president-elect, and the media is enabling what I call his fake it till you make it strategy. And they're hoping that people will just weary of the 2020 election and just say, enough with it, he won. They're already trying to make him seem like he's already the president because he's forming COVID commissions and doing all kinds of glorious stuff on behalf of the American people right now that they're going off and parading. And I'm telling you, that is a lie from you-know-where. And I think, and it's all part of a calculated campaign that ties into how they reported the votes. Now, why didn't they want to go off and count those military votes in the wee hours of the night? Because it may have given an indication that Trump was doing better than they wanted to go off and report, because military typically goes 80-20 for President Trump. And so it makes sense that they didn't want to create a narrative that Trump was gaining steam in Michigan in the middle of the night. Instead, they wanted to show that Trump was losing steam in the middle of the night. And that fit the media narrative, that fit to the point where outlets like CNN, which should come as no surprise, is going to go off and project Biden as a winner. It should be no surprise to anybody because they were projecting him as a winner before November 3rd. So that's what we're getting into, is this media track right now. And what I'm engaged in, what the Great Lakes Justice Center is engaged in, what the Republican Party is engaged in, are a series of elections, or a series of lawsuits now to go off and share the truth. Because I can tell you, in the course of our execution of duty of the poll challenger, we were blocked from being able to add our comments into the poll book. That's supposed to be part of the public record. And I've heard Chris Thomas on the radio repeatedly talking about, hey, if the poll challengers would have thought that there was an issue with the process, then they should have gotten it entered into the poll book. Well, that would have been nice, except that even when he was present, We had poll challengers that are on record and have signed affidavits to the fact that he blocked them from entering that information into the poll book. So I get a little frustrated when I hear people being that deliberately disingenuous. And when it all comes down to it, what I witnessed inside of Detroit was a lot of disingenuous actions here. And I think all of it was done to get us all riled up on kind of all the penny ante stuff. In the meantime, all the big theft was really going on behind the scenes.
Pat, you and I have had an opportunity to review some independent data that was sent to us as it relates to 4 counties actually in the state of Michigan, in particular 3. You want to educate our listeners on what that showed?
Yeah, so we went off and did some, well, I didn't do this. This is a gentleman from out of our state that just likes to do number crunching. He's concerned about the future of his grandkids, and he's been analyzing elections for the last 10 years and trying to identify ways to communicate, let's just say, voting anomalies that have happened for a long time. I mean, dating back to President Obama's second election back in 2012. And he wanted to go off and identify what was really going on. And he did this linear regression analysis. And what he did was compare straight ticket voting to individual voting for all the presidential candidates. And when you go off and do that analysis, it was very interesting. It was showing that in Republican precincts, very strong Republican precincts, the more Republican it was, the more likely they were to vote for Joe Biden as president.
Mm-hmm. And to a huge degree.
It was all stacked. I mean, you'd expect everything to be relatively consistent. So if your straight ticket results are Republican, then you'd expect the individuals to be pretty close to Republican as well. That's not what happened. And just in case that wasn't interesting enough, the more Democrat you were, the more likely you were to vote for President Trump. Except that the center line of that graph was skewed heavily towards shifting votes to Joe Biden. And it's actually, if you look at the regression analysis on it, it's actually, you can see the slope of the curve. It's a negative slope on the curve, and it's a pretty straight line across it. I mean, it's not difficult to go off and do a curve fit on this to show that it appears to be driven by some sort of an algorithm. And why is this kind of strange, and how is this actually happening? Well, I'll tell you, one of the theories is that they potentially were switching votes from people that had individual, meaning non-straight party votes for President Trump. The theory is that they may be switching them to straight party Democrat tickets. And just as kind of in support of that assertion, one of the little aberrations that was kind of very strange, if you look at the votes in Genesee County, not all counties go off and provide this information. Genesee County actually did. About 61,000 votes for president were cast in Genesee County. And typically, sometimes people don't vote for everybody on the ballot. It's called an undervote situation when they do that. And so you may have an undervote for some of for one or more of the candidates that are sitting on the ballot. So you may not have a circle filled in for every single one of them. Typically, you get maybe anywhere from 4 to 8% of an undervote. Maybe at the top, make it a 10% undervote. In Genesee County, they found out that out of the 61,000 people who voted, 44,000 were undervoted. And so that was kind of strange.
Yeah, that's very strange.
And by the way, I should point out, for those of the listeners that are concerned about the U.S. Senate race in Michigan, that also highlights that if they're flipping an individual vote for President Trump that may have featured an individual vote for John James, then the idea of this flipping could have implications all the way down the ballot for Republicans. So this is a key concern that needs to be investigated, and there's ways to go off and prove it. We're in the midst of going off and highlighting that this is just more than an algorithm. Right now, it's already like this just doesn't happen in the real world, folks. This is something that's been manipulated to appear this way. We're going to go off and find out exactly how that happened, and we think we've already got some very good information around that already. So,
and Pat, in that data analysis, it actually showed in the 3 counties that 69,000 votes were removed from President Trump and 69,000 votes were added to Biden.
Roughly, that's about 140,000 votes flip. And remember, we were talking about the deficit here in Michigan right now. It's 146,123. So now when you start adding up all the quote-unquote penny ante votes, which when you start talking about thousands of ballot envelopes being backdated, now you start getting to the point that it is very, very conceivable that President Trump actually won Michigan.
And that 140,000 vote turnaround was just 3 counties.
That was just 3 counties. And that didn't even include Antrim County that had that nice little snafu with the quote-unquote software glitch. I mean, software glitch is just one way of trying to deceive everybody into saying, hey, nothing to see here. These aren't the droids you're looking for. It's just, when you have to sometimes hit the power button and reboot your computer, that's all that happened. No, there's something much more serious going on.
This was
here.
Systemic.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is that same thread was evident in Pennsylvania. I know they got a couple different instances of overt vote flips. And this is how it happens. If you want to go off and do mass theft of votes, what you do is you don't add votes, you don't subtract votes, because eventually you got to have precincts that balance, and it would be too obvious, except in the city of Detroit, because it's more obvious if you balance it. But it's too obvious if you don't balance it. If you have, everybody's seen these stats that say 200% of the eligible voters in a given precinct voted. Well, that's tough to explain away, right? Mm-hmm. If you got so what they do instead is flip votes. Mm-hmm. So if he comes up as a Trump, they switch it over to a Biden. That way you stay neutral on the total number of ballots cast. And that's why you see these flips. And what they saw on screen again, multiple instances of this in Pennsylvania, another key battleground state, is that they had 1 minute. They had a certain tally. I don't remember the number, but there was with a refresh of the screen, Trump lost 19,000 votes and Biden gained 19,000 votes.
It was 19,958.
Yeah, so
it was the exact number. Trump lost that. Biden gained that.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, but there's no easy way of going off and explaining that away.
No.
And that's not clerical error. That's not a software glitch. That is a deliberate feature of a software program. And so that's where the fun is starting right now. And I'll tell you, this election is not over. And I've just done some quick analysis, and you start extending this out to all the other states that I believe are in play. Michigan has 16 electoral college votes. Pennsylvania has 20 electoral college votes. Georgia has 16. Arizona 11. Wisconsin 10. All of them are in play based on this. And last count I saw, I think President Trump had 229 votes. Now you add up these are another 73 in addition. Or no, sorry. Yeah, 73 because I didn't include North Carolina in there, I don't think. That's 73 more votes. That's more than enough. That's almost 300 votes for President Trump. He only needs 270 to win. That tells a much different story. So I kind of want to highlight to all your listeners, I mean, maybe this is the best of both worlds, right? So all the Biden supporters can celebrate now and be really happy, but then all the Trump supporters can be really happy on January 20th and for the next 4 years because President Trump will be our president.
Pat, many people are so disgusted and so despondent, and they don't think that they've seen 4 years of a president being attacked with impeachment hoaxes and Ukraine hoaxes and fake Russian hoaxes, and not seeing any arrests and not seeing justice served. Many people believe that this fraudulent election will stand, and that Biden will, in fact, be inaugurated. I don't believe that. Do you believe that's what's going to happen?
No, I see sufficient evidence of election fraud that when we get a chance to make our case in a court of law, I think we're going to be victorious. And I think we're going to start seeing, first of all, a renewed appreciation for civics in our country because people are starting to understand the election process to a degree that they never did before. The volunteer turnout that we saw from poll challenges this time. I mean, in Michigan, you've lived here quite a while, Dave, and everybody just kind of accepts that the city of Detroit and Wayne County, there's going to be corruption, right? Mm-hmm. We just kind of just say, well, we just got to make sure we overcome it in all the other, areas of the state. Well, the Democrats are looking at other areas of the state as growth opportunities lately, and so we need to be vigilant on all this. We need to realize that you've got to protect the integrity of our election. It's very important. Rule of law is very important. When you obstruct a poll challenger from executing their duties under statute, that is a big deal. And if you interfere with it, you are interfering with free and fair elections. Ultimately, our country, our constitutional republic, is about the rule of law. And anytime we abrogate that concept on it, we're enabling those who want to undermine our system of government. And I think we've said this before. I mean, we're in a battle between those who want to fundamentally transform America, as President Obama said, and those who want to fundamentally preserve America. And you and I and a lot of others and a lot of your viewers are firmly in the camp of we want to preserve what's noble, true, and excellent, praiseworthy about America. And one other key thought, and a lot of people have used the term attempted coup for what's going on here, and I'm in that camp. Mm-hmm. I believe what's happened here is just a continuation of what we've seen since the president took office in 2016. It's an attempted coup. Everything's been there to undermine his presidency, and in turn, it seeks to undermine our system of government. When you see protesters that I would call rioters seeking to target police officers, like when you see that blatant shooting of those officers or sheriffs in the car out in Texas, that thuggery that's going on there, and you see the police being portrayed as the enemy rather than the defenders of the rule of law on it, we have issues. They are the first symbol. They're the front line of the recognition that we are a nation of laws. They're called law enforcement for a reason. So it makes sense that those who want to undermine or fundamentally transform America want to get these guys out of the way first. And so we can't let them get away with that.
Pat, last question. Many people say, well, what can I do to help? What can I do to make a difference? What do you tell those folks?
There's a lot of things. First of all, don't buy into the media narrative around Biden as president-elected. That is a lie from the pit of hell.
Turn it off.
And tell everybody you know that is not the case. Matter of fact, let them know that what we're going to experience over the next few weeks is what I'm referring to as the Great Fade. And what do I mean by that? Biden hit his high water mark on the number of electoral college votes, according to CNN, around 290 or whatever. And every day that goes by, it's going to drop further and further and further until he's going to be well down below that 270 threshold. And at the same time, President Trump's going to be going higher and higher and higher. That's the message they need to hold to. And in order to go off and counter that media narrative, I'm recommending anytime that there's a Trump rally, and I know the president's planning to hold all kinds of campaign-style rallies all across the country, get out there and let your voice be heard. The media can only ignore it for so long. The fact that we're out there supporting our president and making sure we are just interested in a free and fair election, we are interested in the rule of law, that message needs to be conveyed loud and clear.
Pat, how can folks follow your efforts? They need to do it on a daily basis.
Go to letsfixstuff.org, and when I'm pressed for time and I don't have a chance to put out a full detailed post on everything that's going on like I have been for the last few days, I was out at the Wayne County Board of Canvassers this morning, for example, and it's tough to find time to actually document everything that's out there.
Yeah, it's brutal.
So I'll default to the old Twitter universe and try to get it out on there at PJ Colbeck, or also on Facebook, so that everybody gets treated to all the election truth being shared by our folks out at Facebook. Don't click on that garbage. No. But I will get it up on social media. And but letsfixstuff.org is where I'm going to put all the detailed stuff and the detailed analysis. It's just I could be putting out a post pretty much every 15 minutes with all the information that's coming across the desk right now. So I'm doing this balance of communicating the data and gathering the data, and it's tough to do sometimes.
Pat, I'd like to thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. You're an incredible role model for every American about courage and patriotism and making a difference for the future of our country, and I thank you.
Hey, thank you, Dave. God bless you.
You too. Folks, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail.